Hey everybody, we're back again on a special First Friday edition of Friday PM. I want to thank Danny Cashman once again. He's an excellent guy. I want to thank him so much for the interview. But right now, I'm really excited to introduce my next guest, friend to the show, Amanda Painter. Amanda's been on the show several times, talking about what's going to be happening, forecasting a little bit in the zodiac.
Yeah.
A little bit of horoscope stuff. So Amanda has told us a lot about kind of this past winter. We talked a little bit last year, but you've said there's some really interesting new developments coming up this spring.
Yeah, and we just came through like a pretty like funky and gnarly period through like March and April with like eclipses and retrogrades all shaking out. And now things are kind of evening out, but they're also like heating up at the same time.
Okay.
So, right now we're at the heart of Taurus season. Taurus is an earth sign. So, it's a great time for like focusing on things like gardening or like
Yeah.
indulging your five senses, getting outdoors, enjoying the flowers, really kind of like settling into like being in your body again after things have been so chaotic.
Yes.
But at the same time, like, right now as we're taping this, like
Yeah.
we have a bunch of planets kind of clustering in fire signs.
Okay.
And by the time this airs, one of those planets, Mercury, will be moving from Aries, a fire sign, into Taurus, an earth sign.
Okay.
So you might start to notice just like, if you've been feeling like your brain has kind of been like engaged, ready to go, very alert, it might kind of like chill out a little bit
Yeah.
when Mercury moves into Taurus, kind of as a steadying influence. Might want to really kind of like focus on one thing at a time a lot more.
Okay.
But we have like the planets are finally getting out of their like post-retrograde territory, so they're much more free and clear.
Moving forward.
Much more of a forward movement.
Well,
Yeah.
with Mercury and Taurus, do you find that that's more of, because Taurus is more stable, than Aries, for example. And
Right,
so
right.
is that more, stable time of looking at, grounded things? I know Taurus is very earthy.
So we have that mix of like the earth and the fire right now. So you have like that energy of the fire, kind of like lighting things up, but then like the stability of the earth in Taurus, kind of like saying, all right, but we have like a handle on reality.
So if people out there don't know, how can they look on your website or, other social media to find out more about these things?
Yeah.
And do you post weekly? Do you post blogs? Do you do any things where they can really see more of what's going on?
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
can either check for my public posts on Facebook. I also have a secondary Facebook profile that's more related to my business. And my website is amanda-painter.com.
Okay.
So I try to post there regularly, like once a week-ish. Facebook is usually, a little bit more often during the week, a variety of topics.
So you find that one of the bigger things right now is this Mercury kind of transitioning into.
Well, it's one of the things. I mean, it's part of a bigger
Okay.
picture of, as I mentioned, planets sort of gathering in the fire
Okay.
signs.
Could you tell us more about that?
I would love to. Yeah.
Okay,
So we have Mercury right now in Aries. As I said, the day after this airs, I think, is when it moves into Taurus.
Okay.
Mars is the planet of like action and aggression and like libido and motivation, and that is in Leo, and it has been for a little bit because it had a really long retrograde that went back from Leo to Cancer. So it's been in Leo a little bit. It's going to be in Leo, I think through June.
Yeah.
It's in Leo for a while, and
Yeah.
so that's I think really about finally really going for what you want.
Exactly.
Really tapping into courage, do the thing that maybe scares you a little bit, but
Right.
it's like calling to you. But also like keeping tabs on your pride and your ego.
Exactly.
Leo can be a little bit dramatic, can be a
Yeah.
little bit sensitive to being snubbed.
Yeah.
But it's also the sign of compassion and generosity. So I think that's, compassion and generosity, I think, are precious as gold. And gold is like another symbol of Leo. So
right. Yep.
keeping that in mind is like Mars wants you to really go forward and go for it. Also remembering to like, remember the people who you're with. Be gentle.
I think Leo gets, like all signs, gets a mixed rap. But I always knew them to be, in some ways, the fullest expression of the human personality, and it's the
a lot of vitality, a lot of humanitarianism, a lot of leadership, a lot of generosity, but also, that ability to kind of dramatize things.
Right,
Sometimes they can get a little bit full or very talkative. I've known some quiet Leos, but I've also known some very, very talkative Leos.
You find some quiet Leos, but they're usually those ones that underneath that quiet surface still have that big
Oh yeah.
boisterous Leo. And as an actress, you see
Hmm.
a lot of Leos in the world of drama
All sorts of
and
signs show up
music
in
and
drama. Yeah.
entertainment. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And politics, things like that.
Oh sure.
Anywhere where that big personality
Hmm.
can do well. So that will be in Mars. That Mars will be in Leo.
Mars is Leo right now
Yeah.
and will be, I think, through June, if I remember
Okay.
correctly. And then Venus, the planet
Venus.
of love, is
Yep.
also in Aries right now.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you know, Venus, Mars, and Mercury are kind of three of the personal planets. So representing mind, kind of like your energy and motivation, and like love and emotions and receptivity for Venus. So having them all in fire signs, it just feels like a lot of energy to me.
Oh yeah, a
It's
lot of
really kind of
vitality.
a lot of vitality. I think Venus and Aries is kind of just lighting a fire under, really attracting who and what you want,
Right,
right?
right, yeah.
Like I think Venus, Venus tends to be associated with kind of like more passive signs, like, Taurus and Libra,
Yeah.
very much about relating and welcoming in. But in Aries, she gets a little bit lustier, a little bit more assertive,
Yes, right. That's the difference.
less passive. So I feel like to balance the Venus and the Aries energies together, there's something about like, making that step toward what you want and being very direct about it, but also then kind of stepping back and kind of allowing the space for it to show up. Like you don't
Right.
have to like pursue, make your intentions known and then let that be met, right?
Well, because Venus, as it expresses itself in Libra, is going to be the opposite of Aries, which expresses itself as
Right.
Mars. So
Right.
those are opposites. Now, Venus, as it expresses itself as Taurus, is the neighbor to Aries. So they're
Very
still pretty
different.
different. Yeah.
Very different.
That could add that spark. It also seems like maybe it could be for that Libra out there, especially who's too shy. This could add that for them to go and speak to that person that
Yeah,
they
you
maybe
can
met at the coffee shop before.
exactly sort of like just thinking about like sort of like leaning into the energy and then
Yes.
noticing if you've like leaned a little further than you need to. You
Yeah.
just say like, okay, well let me open the floor and
Yes.
let something kind of show up, give it the
Okay.
space. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's that Mercury, Mars is Leo, and then Venus. Now, are those? Other than the moon, I always think of those as the most influential planets.
Yeah, well, they're the ones that I think because they relate to very personal facets of our personality. They're the ones that, cycle through the zodiac very quickly. So they relate to our kind of like day to day, month to month, year to year existence a lot more tangibly. They're easier to notice. Like I said, they relate to parts of our psyche in very kind of personality type ways.
Yep.
Whereas some of the outer planets, the ones that move a lot slower,
Yes.
they tend to express more clearly in like generational, decades long or years long
Movements,
trends.
almost,
Yeah.
and trends.
I mean, they still have personal life implications, but it's less about like, oh, what part of my personality does this planet represent? They're more about kind of like instigating or initiating or triggering, events or, if I was going to do like a birth chart reading for you and look at what's happening for you with the planets as they move currently in the sky, I'd be looking at, oh, how are the outer planets, the slow ones, interacting with your personal planets, the fast ones? And that relationship between the fast planets in your personal chart and the slow planets, like when those come into contact, are usually times of big changes.
Okay.
So yeah, there's an interesting interplay between the different types of planets and the speed that they move.
And so when
Yeah.
they would say, we're in the age of Aquarius, or we were at one point,
Yeah, that's
was
the
all
whole
mumbo
thing.
jumbo,
I
right?
don't know if it's humba jumbo. It's more like I think the popular conception of what that means is not quite accurate to what the
actually,
astrological
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And I think we're so early in the age of Aquarius that we don't really have a firm grasp on what it is.
What it is and what it
yeah,
means.
yeah.
And the kind of the upheaval that goes along with it. And things
Potentially,
like that a lot of times. But is there anything of note with the kind of the transitions of the moon? Because we'll hopefully see you next month on our first Friday if you're able to. But within this month, it just cycles so quickly. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah, I'm
pin
not
down
gonna.
any
Yeah,
one
I'm not gonna give a
thing.
day-to-day calendar of the moon signs.
Yeah,
But you can find that online.
Right, you can
I
find it
will
online.
say that pretty much all of the major planets, like the ones that relate to the individual signs, they're all in direct motion right now, except for Pluto, which will be retrograde by the time this comes out. But
Okay.
Pluto again moves so slowly. I don't worry too much about its retrogrades unless it's interacting with something else because it's retrograde a lot, right?
Yes,
It's just kind of like
right,
part of the normal
That's what it
condition.
does, yeah.
But I feel like with so many planets in direct motion, it's just sort of like another signal from the cosmos that it's a good time to move forward on things, especially things that got a little like tangled up during the retrogrades and with the eclipses, and you're kind of sorting through what early or early in the year and the spring were about. Like
Yeah.
May through June is like really looking a lot more clear for kind of like getting shit done and getting your life a little bit more in order, trying to make some progress on things. So it's just, I think, a very like interesting and exciting time when that happens, because often we have a bunch of planets retrograde and it can feel a little bit like we're reviewing this, but I want to move forward with that. So May through June is much more a time of, I think, more clear potential for forward momentum and building on things.
Of your mind.
Yeah.
And so this time of year, are there other things that you find that would be interesting things to do based upon those?
I mean, we're in Maine.
Yeah.
It's warming up. It's always about getting outdoors, right?
Get outdoors. Yeah,
Get outdoors, enjoys people, enjoy the art walk. Yeah, whatever's going on. I will say, like I think I mentioned May 10th, Mercury enters Taurus.
Yes.
So again, that's going to be a little bit more earth to kind of stabilize and balance, like the quick and more impulsive energy of the fire signs.
Okay. Yeah.
May 12th, 2 days after that, is the Scorpio full moon. So that's going to be the moon in Scorpio opposite the sun in Taurus.
When they are opposing signs.
Exactly.
Yeah. So again, for the kind of the simple folks to see, any opposing sign is when they're going to be basically 6 months apart from each other. Then those are the opposite signs.
Yeah.
And that's when, and the reason they're opposing is because the energy in the one sign is at its weakest as well.
I'm not sure what you just said, actually, but I will say that,
I know that when because my sun and moon are in opposition. And so when my moon sign is at its strongest, my sun sign is at its weakest.
Okay, I think I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
they're opposites.
Right. So what you're saying is like when, if the sign is currently opposite your personal sun sign, you feel like it's a little bit tougher for you to kind of like move through life.
Yeah, I think when it seems as though when you're 6 months from one, the influence of that sign is at its farthest in the zodiac, while the influence, but this is where you're saying the sun will be influenced by Taurus and the moon by Scorpio.
Right. And I would say, I think, opposite signs actually have a lot in common, right? They're the two halves of a polarity. You can think of them as like two sides of a coin.
Okay.
Whereas it's the signs right next to each other that are the most different.
Oh,
and so I think there's actually kind of more potential to feel like things are a little challenging to your sun sign.
Yes.
But I mentioned the full moon on May 12th, partly because it is an energy peak.
Okay.
It's going to be kind of like the peak of like you said, a peak of energy between two opposing signs that have something in common, but they're also opposite each other in the way that you and I are opposite right now. Like you can think of it as like you're facing off against something and you have to kind of negotiate that conversation, right?
Yes.
So same with a full moon. So I think with Taurus and Scorpio, because they're both fixed signs, you really want to watch out for stubbornness around May 12th, getting attached to just one way of doing things, paying attention to like physical sensations and, any bodily ailments, and if they're indicating any underlying emotions, because Scorpio is a water sign, very much related to your emotions. Taurus is a earth sign, very much related to the physical. So what's that relationship between like how you're feeling physically and how you're feeling emotionally? Is something coming to a head? Are you like in some kind of stalemate and neither one of you wants to budge because you really feel very possessive about what you believe in, what you want to have happen? And just noticing that. And if a situation feels like it's gotten to that kind of, wow, we can't budge, wait till May 13th to try and move forward with it.
Okay.
Sometimes you just got to kind of like let that full moon start to soften, and then you can kind of like find the way forward, find the path of compromise, find the negotiation point a little bit easier.
Within that window of those few days. And
yeah.
Both of those fixed signs, because fixed signs often mean, again, because a lot of our audiences, this is the kind of the basics. They're fixed in their opinions a lot of times, and that usually
can be
kind of so when you have certain signs that are mutable, right? I think that they're the types of signs that their minds can be changed somewhat, or their flexibility.
Yeah, right? And also I remember one of my teachers telling me with the mutable signs, that's Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces,
Right.
that they can sometimes kind of like act a little bit more like a fixed sign or act a little bit more like the cardinal sign. So they can get a little bit more stubborn. I think they can really take initiative.
Right.
And then sometimes it's just about the flexibility
But
and the
within
flow.
that,
Yeah.
they're still flexible because they'll be stubborn sometimes and not other times. Whereas
Yeah.
certain signs that are fixed are it somewhat seems as though they're more set in their ways in a
It
sense.
can be. And,
Yeah.
it's good to remember that anybody can have their moments of feeling stubborn.
Right, right.
Anybody can have their points where they're more willing to be flexible around certain issues or topics.
Yes.
And that we all have, all these planets all over the place in our charts. We probably have some fixed sign energy.
Right,
We
right,
probably
right.
have some mutable sign energy. We probably have some of that initiative and from the cardinal signs. It's just about balance and what's being emphasized either due to like an event in your life or an event in the astrology. Sometimes you see people together, you think, oh, those sun signs aren't compatible at all. How do they make it work? And often it has a lot to do with everything else in their chart. They might have some points of wonderful compatibility with the
Yes.
other planets in their chart. You just don't know it from the sun sign.
Well, and the interesting thing is it can correlate as well to what they're about and their interests. So
Mhm.
a couple, for example, that might have a very great Venus, that might correlate to what they like to do. Maybe they like traveling together or things that they love. A couple that
Mhm.
might have, for example, if we're just talking about couples, the similar Mars that they coexist well, they might also be people that are they both very directed people and
Right, right.
ambitious. So those
Which can
things
be
work.
tricky. Like,
Yeah.
like if you both have like Mars and Aries, you might both be so like
Right.
headstrong
Yes.
that it's hard to give into the other two.
Right,
Whereas
right.
if you have complementary Mars signs,
Yes.
this person might be gung ho when you're happy to take a back seat in
Yeah.
certain situations and
Yeah.
vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's not all about being same, but about finding the places of complementariness,
Yeah,
complementariness.
complementariness. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like I
Yeah.
always look at it as like those fighting fish. You can't put the two exact same fish
Right,
together.
right.
So sometimes, like you would think two people that are both Aries or both have Moon in Aries or Mars in Aries would get along because they're so similar. But yeah, you have to have different approaches to things to make
Exactly.
it work. Yeah.
Exactly. Because if you both have like the exact same needs, like which one of you is going to fill that need for the
Right.
other one?
Right. Exactly.
Or if, if like my need is to be absolutely free and your need is to be absolutely secure and we're a couple, like that can be really hard if the situation is where I need to be free or the situations where you need to feel secure.
Right.
Where how do you
How do
find
you
that balance?
how do you find the balance?
How do you make your partner feel secure while you get your freedom? How do you let your partner be free while you find your security? And that's partly just like basic relationship navigation, but it's interesting to see it play out through the signs and through the planets that are in those signs. And then when you kind of know that, you can start to like find out, oh, I see. When I am, at a party and I've been drinking, it really feeds into my need for freedom. But that's when my partner needs security the most.
Right,
So if we
right.
can be sensitive to that, then we can communicate better about it and still get our needs met. But we just need to be more explicit in our communication about
yeah.
what's going on and what we need, and I'll be right back, and that
And
kind
if
of
it's a
thing.
language that people don't even know,
Mhm.
because a lot of people don't even know their charts and how it
Yeah.
relates to other people's. But once you start learning that language, then you can actually put it together into paragraphs and sentences. So I know we're running short on time. We're about to go outside to talk to some artists to close the show
Yeah,
out. But
I did. I
let me
just
make
wanted
sure.
to cover
Yeah.
just some highlights from the rest of the
Good.
month of
Yeah,
May,
go
just so
for
we
it.
have that.
Yep.
So after the full moon on the 12th, May 20th, the sun will enter Gemini. So that'll
Yep.
be a shift from the earthy, solid, stable, body-focused sign of Taurus into like the very quick, airy, mental land of Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, so a lot about communication, socialness, mind moving quicker.
Yeah.
Expect communication to pick up the pace with that very social vibe into the month of June. May 24th, Saturn will enter Aries. So that's the planet of like responsibility, structure, discipline, boundaries, containers,
Yeah.
moving into a very fiery, nimble sort of sign.
Okay.
So it kind of like shifts the tone of where we need to do the most work or where we might feel a greater sense of responsibility to others, greater sense of obligation and duty, a need for more discipline, a need to work a little bit harder for the things that we want. If you know your chart or we want to know your chart and want to know where Saturn wants you to work harder, that's can be an interesting to look at.
Yes.
But I think also Saturn will help offer another steadying influence and all of that really sparkly, lit up Aries and Leo energy that we have going on, all that fiery ambition and impulse in the month of May. May 26th, we have a Gemini new moon conjunct Mercury.
Okay.
So the sun and moon together in Mercury, I mean, in Gemini with Mercury close by. So at that point, I just kind of glanced at that chart quickly. There's going to be a lot of fire and a lot of air energy. So if you think about like what makes a fire burn, you need the spark and then it needs oxygen, right?
Yeah.
So it's it could be a very combustible end of the month into June. What are your top two like biggest, most important ideas or inspirations heading into June? I think at late May, like that's the thing to focus on. See if you can buddy up with someone, right? Gemini is the sign of the twins. So in late May, find your buddy, whether it's an accountability buddy, a support buddy, a venting buddy, someone you can create with, really feeding each other's flames in a way that's supportive so you can prevent mental burnout and stay grounded somehow. You need that other person to kind of like sometimes touch base with, to kind of like keep your feet on solid ground, but still moved forward without kind of running around in circles. Like Gemini can get very like stuck in its head, lots of mental, gyrations. And there's not a lot of planets in earth or water signs in late May. So I think that describes the need to take more conscious steps to and repeated efforts to like fill the well, filling your creative well, filling your emotional well, remembering empathy, remembering to feel and not just think and act. I think when those elements are in short supply in the astrology, it's on us to kind of remember to bring them so that we can balance ourselves out, balance each other out. And then just kind of peeking ahead into June, Jupiter is going to move signs from Gemini to Cancer. So we'll talk about that probably next month.
Yeah,
but
we can talk about that.
That's another big planetary sign change.
And then, as you said before, when it's one of these kind of more outer chart types of planets, it has more reverberations, more or less, for longer term, because it's not going to switch right back to the next thing anytime soon. And
Jupiter's like sort of like in between the fast planets and the slow planets, so it's often called a transpersonal planet. So instead of being personal or impersonal, transpersonal. So it kind of threads that needle between the inner and the outer kind of cultural context, and it's usually in each sign for about a year. It's like I think like 14 months ish, something like that. So
I think we should touch on that a lot next month, because isn't Jupiter also known to be the planet of luck, affiliated with luck somehow?
Luck, opportunity, optimism, expansion,
doors
all kinds of
opening
things
instead of closing.
Or things kind of getting exacerbic if they're not going well. Sometimes it will just magnifies whatever's there. But often it's known as being kind of like a benefic or beneficial influence on things.
And I think isn't it with somewhat correlated with Sagittarius?
Yes, it is the planetary ruler of Sagittarius.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see Amanda next month.